Nobody dares to mention this woman's name because everyone who investigates her always dies mysteriously. The film begins by showing a young woman named Ashley having a video call with her female best friend. During their conversation, they talk about a mysterious house located in a small town called Ashland Falls. At first, everything seems completely normal, but in the middle of the conversation, Ashley suddenly hears knocking coming from outside her bedroom door.
To the power grid. Oh. I said, come in.
When she opens the door, there's nobody standing in front of her room. Thinking it is just her younger sibling trying to prank her, Ashley starts walking around the house to look for them. However, without Ashley realizing it, a mysterious figure has been silently watching her from the living room the entire time. After making sure nobody is around the house, Ashley returns to her bedroom feeling confused. But just as she is about to close the door, the knocking sound suddenly happens again, instantly frightening her. The story then shifts to a married couple named Chuck and Maria, who are looking for a new house with the help of a real estate agent named Bonnie. Bonnie offers them an old house in Ashland Falls that is surprisingly cheap, even though it is much larger than the previous house they looked at. Chuck immediately becomes suspicious because, according to him, it makes no sense for a house that big to be sold at such a low price. Bonnie explains that the house has been sitting on the market for almost 3 years, so the owner wants to sell it as quickly as possible. Chuck and Maria begin to feel interested in the property, especially because the house is spacious and looks comfortable. However, the atmosphere suddenly changes when Chuck's younger sister Isabel arrives and sees the house for the first time. Unlike Chuck and Maria, who look excited, Isabel immediately seems uncomfortable the moment she enters the house. Chuck explains that the house has plenty of space that would be perfect for Isabel's artwork, but Isabel still looks uneasy, almost as if she has a bad feeling about the place.
This place is about the same price, but twice the space.
It's definitely better than the last place Bonnie showed us.
Hey, Izzy, what do you think?
After they officially move in, the story begins focusing on Chuck's point of view during their first few days living there. It does not take long before Chuck realizes that there are many strange problems inside the house. During a rainstorm, he discovers that almost every part of the roof is leaking. Feeling furious because he thinks they were deceived, Chuck immediately calls Bonnie while sending her pictures of the leaks as proof.
Are you sure it's not a plumbing problem?
There's at least 2 leaks in the master bedroom.
After that, he enters Maria's studio where she is designing dresses while doing a live stream. Inside the room, Chuck notices an old mannequin named Martha standing in the corner with a creepy appearance. Chuck clearly dislikes the mannequin, but Marie explains that Martha was something she kept from her very first studio in New York, so she cannot bring herself to throw it away. However, just as Chuck leaves the room and closes the door, the mannequin appears to move slightly on its own without anyone noticing. Not long afterward, Chuck goes outside to inspect the roof more closely, but instead he runs into his neighbor named Larry. Larry reveals that the previous owner of the house died by suicide inside the property. Chuck is shocked because Bonnie never mentioned anything about that before. Chuck later goes back inside and checks the leak photos he previously sent to Bonnie. But while looking more carefully at one of the pictures, Chuck suddenly feels chills running down his spine because there is a shotgun lying on the floor of the house. He is absolutely certain the gun was not there when he took the photo earlier. The next morning, Chuck is shocked after seeing Martha standing outside the house. Not long later, Larry comes over to see what happened. Chuck tries convincing himself that it is probably just Isabel pulling some kind of prank. Larry then explains that the town of Ashland Falls has carried a dark history for many years. Many residents have mysteriously died after suffering from severe depression and strange disturbances that nobody can explain. According to the stories spread around town, all of those incidents are connected to a mysterious entity that targets people who are mentally vulnerable. Larry keeps referring to the entity simply as her, which only makes Chuck even more confused. However, Larry refuses to explain any further and instead suggests that Chuck search for answers himself at the local library. Later that afternoon, Chuck visits the town library to look for information about Ashland Falls. While searching through old books, Chuck suddenly notices several piles of books stacked neatly on the floor even though they were not there moments earlier. There, Chuck encounters Ashley again, the same woman from the beginning of the film. However, Ashley now looks completely terrified and emotionally unstable. With a panicked expression, Ashley warns Chuck to put the books back and leave the town before it is too late. She also tells him never to dig deeper into the history of Ashland Falls. Chuck tries offering help, but Ashley refuses.
Don't do it. Trust me. Just put the books back and leave.
Sorry. I call someone for you, Ashley.
Just get out. out of this town.
Before leaving the library, Chuck notices a poster for a group called Friends of Gardening. Curious about it, he decides to attend the meeting that same night. However, once he arrives, Chuck quickly realizes that the group is not actually a gardening club. Larry and several other residents are already inside the room. During the meeting, Chuck learns shocking news that Ashley has been found dead after taking her own life. The residents begin explaining that almost everyone in Ashland Falls has lost someone because of the mysterious entity haunting the town. According to them, even people who leave the town can still be followed by it. Growing more confused, Chuck finally asks who exactly they are talking about. One of the men eventually explains that the entity is named Helen Foster, a woman believed to have been the source of terror in Ashland Falls for decades. Helen's name is feared so deeply that many residents refuse to say it out loud because they believe it can attract her attention. They also explain that the only way to stop Helen's terror is by finding an address known as 825 Forest Road, the house where Helen once lived during the 1940s and where she eventually died. The problem is that the address has mysteriously disappeared from every map of the town, as if it never existed.
See some more empty seats this time.
One new suicide, everyone is hiding again.
We haven't had a suicide in years, and now that young girl, Ashley.
Lost a loved one to suicide or is being terrorized by her.
Sorry, everyone. Who are you talking about? You keep saying her.
Helen Foster. She's the one that's been inflicting pain on this town for decades.
Can be stopped if we find Forest Road.
825.
But it's gone now.
It's like no one knows where it's at.
While the discussion continues, Larry suddenly notices something moving near the staircase. When he goes to check, a terrifying female figure briefly appears. Everyone immediately panics, and the meeting quickly falls apart. The residents rush out of the building in fear, while Chuck, still confused by everything, briefly notices a mysterious figure sitting alone silently inside the church. The story then shifts to Isabel's point of view. Ever since her mother's death, Isabel has never truly recovered mentally. She continues to live with overwhelming guilt and emotional trauma that slowly make her condition even more fragile. After moving into the new house in Ashland Falls, Isabel's situation only becomes worse. Almost every night she suffers from terrifying nightmares about her mother, making it difficult for her to tell the difference between dreams and reality. One night, Chuck tries talking to Isabel about how her therapy has been going. However, during their conversation, Chuck's attention is suddenly drawn towards several sketches and drawings made by Isabel. One particular drawing immediately feels strange to Chuck because the sketch looks exactly like their new house. The disturbing part is that Isabel claims she made the drawing around 2 or 3 years earlier, long before they ever moved to Ashland Falls. Another drawing is even more unsettling. It shows a young girl standing alone in a dark hallway while a pale hand resembling a ghost's hand stretches out from behind and grabs her shoulder. Their conversation eventually shifts toward memories of their late mother. Chuck and Isabel begin remembering some of her strange habits while she was still alive. Their mother often used to stack plates in the kitchen into pyramid-like shapes while leaving small notes behind that read, "They won't put themselves away."
When did you draw this? It looks like our new house.
I can't remember why I drew that.
2, 3 years ago, maybe.
What's this one? Whose hand is that?
A few days later, Isabel becomes friends with a boy named Luke from her school. When Luke visits the house, the two spend time talking in Isabel's room while discussing many things about Ashland Falls. That is when Isabel begins learning that the town is infamous for its terrifying history. Luke tells her the story of a man who died by suicide inside the town library by hanging himself, while neatly stacked piles of books were found beneath his body. According to local rumors, those piles of books still mysteriously appear inside the library even today, and many residents claim they have seen them with their own eyes. Luke then begins talking about the figure believed to be responsible for all the strange incidents in town, a woman named Helen Foster. According to old stories, many years ago, Helen's daughter was constantly bullied at school. Helen repeatedly tried asking for help from the school staff, the bully's parents, and even the town council, but nobody truly cared about her daughter's suffering. Eventually, Helen's daughter could no longer handle the pressure and ended her own life. Her death completely destroyed Helen emotionally. Her grief and anger slowly transformed into terrifying hatred and revenge. Helen eventually murdered the bullies along with their parents, before finally taking her own life using a shotgun. According to the legends surrounding Ashland Falls, Helen once lived in a house located at 825 Forest Road. However, the address has mysteriously vanished from every map of the town, and even the old town maps have been sealed away since the 1950s.
Helen Foster. Her daughter was bullied at the school. Her daughter committed suicide. Yep,
She killed the parents of the bully and the bully too. And then she killed herself, put a shotgun in her mouth. Nobody really knows what happened that day. Just an address, 825 Forest Road.
Helen Foster. Has anyone ever tried to find the house?
Which doesn't exist on any current map.
Later that night, Isabel attends an art exhibition with Maria. During the event, the two begin growing much closer. Maria finally admits to Isabel that she suffers from bipolar disorder and must regularly take medication to keep her emotions stable. Maria also says that Chuck does not really understand mental health struggles, but she personally understands what it feels like to live under constant emotional pressure. Hearing this makes Isabel feel deeply touched because for the first time, someone truly seems to understand her feelings. Suddenly, the sound of a girl screaming echoes from somewhere in the distance, causing panic throughout the gallery. Moments later, an emergency announcement orders all visitors to leave the building immediately. Amid the chaos, Isabel briefly glances toward one of the paintings and notices the figure of a mysterious woman appearing inside it, even though the figure had not been there before. That night, Isabel tries to sleep as usual. However, in the middle of the night, she suddenly wakes up after noticing that the light inside her closet has turned on by itself. Annoyed, Isabel gets out of bed and switches the light off. She even removes the light bulb completely and places it on the table beside her bed to make sure the light cannot turn on again. But only a few seconds later, the closet light begins flickering once more, even though the bulb has already been removed. Before Isabel can even understand what is happening, a pale hand suddenly emerges from inside the closet. Fortunately, it turns out to be nothing more than a nightmare. However, when Isabel truly wakes up, she immediately feels terrified after realizing that the light bulb she removed is actually sitting on the bedside table exactly as it appeared in the dream. A few days later, Isabel meets Luke again and tells him that her nightmares have been getting worse. Isabel even admits that she has started wanting to search for the mysterious address at 825 Forest Road, but Luke immediately warns her not to do it. According to rumors, Ashley and her friends once tried searching for the house as well. Ever since then, Ashley began experiencing strange disturbances before eventually taking her own life. In the middle of their conversation, Isabel suddenly receives a phone call from Chuck. Sounding panicked, Chuck tells Isabel to come home immediately because something has happened to Maria. Isabel quickly rushes home and finds Maria crying in a deeply shaken state. When Isabel asks what happened, Chuck simply tells her to pack her things and says that he will return later. While Isabel is gathering her belongings, Luke arrives at the house to check on her. However, the atmosphere immediately becomes strange when Luke notices a photo of Isabel with her mother. Luke says that when he arrived at the house earlier, the woman from the picture was the one who opened the door and let him inside. According to Luke, the woman even introduced herself as Isabel's mother. Isabel immediately freezes in fear because her mother has been dead for a long time. However, Luke insists that the woman truly claimed to be her mother.
Chuck wants me out after what happened to Maria.
Where will they go?
I don't know.
I met your mom.
What did you just say?
This is her, right? She let me in.
You mean you saw Maria?
Who is this?
That's my mother.
She said she was your mother.
My mom's dead. She died in a car crash a few months ago.
The two of them begin panicking when they suddenly hear the sound of glass breaking downstairs. Slowly, Isabel and Luke walk toward the source of the noise, but when they reach the lower floor, there is nobody there. Growing increasingly frightened, Luke nervously says that maybe he simply imagined the sound before quickly leaving the house. Not long after Luke leaves, Isabel suddenly hears a woman's voice calling her name from the kitchen. The voice sounds incredibly familiar and claims to be her mother. Because Isabel misses her mother so deeply, she slowly begins believing the voice and almost walks toward it. Fortunately, Maria suddenly appears and warns Isabel not to get any closer. A few moments later, the mysterious voice speaks again, saying that the plates cannot stack themselves. Isabel immediately looks toward the kitchen and sees shattered plates scattered across the floor, exactly like the strange habit her mother once had of stacking plates into pyramid shapes. Moments later, the ghostly figure of a woman suddenly appears directly in front of them, terrifying both Isabel and Maria. They try escaping the house, but the front door suddenly locks itself as if something inside the house refuses to let them leave. In a panic, Isabel runs back to her bedroom and locks herself inside while Maria's screams echo throughout the entire house. The story then shifts to Maria's point of view. A few days after officially moving into the house, Maria and Chuck have a serious conversation inside their car about Isabel's condition, as she still looks deeply traumatized after their mother's death. Chuck starts feeling that Isabel's therapy is not helping much and is only wasting money. However, Maria immediately disagrees with him. According to Maria, Isabel's trauma runs much deeper than Chuck realizes, because Isabel was the one driving the car when the accident happened. Maria believes the guilt has slowly been destroying Isabel mentally, little by little, which is why what Isabel truly needs is support and time to heal. After returning home, Maria notices Chuck busy reading old books about the history of Ashland Falls. From those books, they discover something strange. Back in 1953, almost every street name in town was changed, and even the town boundaries were altered. Through those old records, Chuck also learns that their house once had a completely different address, 15 Rose Lane. Not long afterward, Maria walks into the kitchen and immediately becomes confused after seeing stacks of plates arranged into a pyramid shape on the table. At the top of the stack sat a glass containing a small note that read, "They won't put themselves away." Since the strange habit closely resembles Isabel's late mother's behavior, Maria assumes Isabel is responsible and asks Chuck to tell her to clean up the mess. A few days later, Maria is live streaming from her studio while working on a custom dress for a client. At first, everything looks completely normal, just like her usual broadcasts. However, without Maria noticing, the hand of the old mannequin named Martha standing behind her slowly begins moving on its own. The movement is clearly captured on camera, causing viewers in the live stream chat to panic, while Maria remains completely unaware. During the live stream, Maria receives a phone call from her younger sister. Most likely, her sister is trying to warn her about Martha because she regularly watches Maria's streams and sees everything happening on camera. However, Maria does not pay much attention to the call. When her sister calls again, Maria assumes she only wants to see the progress of the bridesmaid dress she is currently making. Because of that, Maria casually lifts the dress toward the camera. But right behind her, Martha's head slowly turns and faces directly toward Maria. The horrifying moment is clearly recorded during the live stream, without Maria realizing it at all. Not long afterward, one of Maria's friends sends her a message telling her to get out of the house immediately. At first, Maria still does not understand what is happening, but only seconds later she suddenly realizes that Martha has completely disappeared. Moments later, a loud crashing sound echoes from the bedroom. Maria slowly walks toward the source of the noise, and when she arrives, she is horrified to see Martha now standing inside the room with its back facing her. A few seconds later, the mannequin's head slowly moves before turning directly toward Maria, terrifying her completely. After the horrifying incident, Chuck and Maria eventually decide to burn Martha outside the house because they begin believing that something is seriously wrong with the mannequin. However, even during the burning, Chuck still tries to think logically. He starts questioning Maria's condition and asks whether she has truly been taking her medication regularly. Chuck even begins wondering if all the strange incidents might simply be hallucinations caused by Maria's unstable mental state. His words immediately offend and anger Maria. According to her, thousands of people saw Martha moving during the live stream, so it is impossible for everything to be only her imagination. Chuck eventually apologizes and tries calming her down. He says they can leave the house if things continue getting worse, but he needs time to handle everything first. Not long afterward, Isabel joins them. Chuck immediately tells Isabel to start packing her belongings because they may have to leave the house soon. After Isabel heads upstairs, Maria returns to the kitchen. But there she once again discovers another strange pyramid of plates stacked on the table. This time, however, there is a new note that reads, "Hello, Maria." Before Maria can even process what it means, the sound of shattering plates suddenly echoes through the house. Moments later, a mysterious woman's voice begins calling Isabel's name and asks her to come downstairs. The voice sounds almost identical to their dead mother's voice. Hearing it, Isabel immediately walks downstairs to search for the source of the voice, even though Maria repeatedly warns her that it is not really their mother. However, Isabel's longing for her mother causes her to continue following the voice into the kitchen. The moment she arrives, Isabel is suddenly confronted by a terrifying apparition appearing directly in front of her. Terrified, Isabel and Maria immediately run upstairs and lock themselves inside separate bedrooms. But the atmosphere quickly becomes even more horrifying when Maria's bedroom door slowly opens by itself, even though nobody is there. Seconds later, the ghostly figure suddenly appears in front of Maria, causing her to scream hysterically. Not long afterward, Maria runs into Isabel's room crying in fear, and the two of them immediately hold on to each other while trying to calm down. However, during the chaos, Isabel notices something strange about Maria. Blood is dripping from Maria's nose while her face looks pale and weak as if she is seriously ill. The story then enters a new chapter titled Forest Road. By this point, Maria's condition has worsened significantly to the point where she can barely move and spends most of her time lying weakly in bed. Not long later, the doorbell rings. When Chuck opens the door, he finds Luke standing outside, carrying important information about the mysterious address known as 825 Forest Road. Luke explains that Ashley had actually managed to locate the house using an old electrical grid map of Ashland Falls. Since the town council only changed the street names and official town maps, they forgot to update the old electrical network records. That is how the true location of 825 Forest Road was finally discovered.
1900s, this tiny coal town was mostly electrified. There's power lines leading out that way. That's where Forest Road is.
After hearing Luke's explanation, Chuck and Isabel immediately decide to go there in hopes of finding answers about the terror haunting them. However, just as they are preparing to leave, the doorbell rings again. This time, Bonnie arrives alongside a cameraman. Bonnie explains that she wants to record Maria's testimonial about the house for a real estate promotion. Chuck tries explaining that it is not a good time because Maria is sick. Strangely, only moments later, Maria suddenly walks downstairs looking far healthier than before. She even insists that she feels completely fine and is ready to do the interview. The sudden change immediately makes Isabel suspicious that something is terribly wrong. In the end, Isabel asks Luke to stay behind and watch over Maria while she and Chuck leave together to search for 825 Forest Road. Luke agrees to stay and help keep an eye on the house while they're gone. After Chuck and Isabel leave for Forest Road in search of Helen Foster's mysterious house, Maria stays behind at home with Luke because she still has to do a short interview with Bonnie and the cameraman who arrived with her. However, from the very beginning, the atmosphere during the interview already feels strange. Maria seems different from usual. Bonnie casually starts the interview by asking Maria to introduce herself in front of the camera, but Maria only says her first name without explaining anything further. When Bonnie asks again for her full name for the recording, Maria refuses to answer and begins acting even stranger. Feeling uncomfortable, Bonnie tries changing the subject and asks how their family found her real estate office. But unexpectedly, Maria suddenly begins talking about a young girl. Maria starts telling a story about her daughter, who used to come home from school crying almost every day. Confused, Bonnie tries steering the conversation back toward the house and property business, but Maria continues speaking as if she is remembering something deeply painful. She explains that one day her daughter came home terrified and found blood filling the bathroom sink inside their house. From the way Maria speaks, Luke slowly realizes that the woman sitting in front of him is no longer the Maria he knew before.
Okay, so Maria, please introduce yourself to the camera. Go ahead, Maria.
My name is Maria.
And last name? Okay, let's see what that looks like.
When my daughter came home from school crying,
Okay, I'm sorry, Maria, are you talking about how you found out about us?
At the same time, Chuck and Isabel finally arrive at an old house hidden deep inside the forest.
This is our house.
The house looks abandoned and completely lifeless. Carefully, they enter the building while searching for proof that the place truly belonged to Helen Foster. Chuck has even planned to burn the house down if it really turns out to be the source of all the terror haunting them. Back at the house, the interview becomes even more horrifying. It is now becoming obvious that Maria is actually being possessed by Helen Foster. Maria begins describing how Helen repeatedly wrote letters to the Clark family, the family of the bullies who constantly tormented her daughter. But nobody cared about the letters. Even after Helen begged many people for help, the bullying toward her daughter only became worse day after day. In the middle of the story, blood suddenly begins flowing from Maria's nose. At the exact same time, inside the old house in the forest, Chuck discovers an old box hidden beneath the floorboards containing several letters. As Chuck reads them, he finally realizes a shocking truth. The abandoned house in the forest was never Helen Foster's house. It actually belonged to the Clark family, the same family whose actions destroyed Helen's daughter's life years ago. Meanwhile, Helen Foster's real house is actually the house Chuck, Maria, and Isabel are currently living in, the house that once had the address 15 Rose Lane. Chuck immediately panics after discovering the truth. He finally realizes that they were never truly searching for Helen Foster's house, because without knowing it, they had already been living inside Helen's real home from the very beginning. Every strange event they experienced after moving there, from the mysterious knocking sounds and stacks of plates to the terrifying disturbances haunting Isabel and Maria, all came from that house. The house itself became cursed the moment Helen Foster ended her life there decades earlier. Ever since then, Helen has seemingly viewed anyone living inside the house as part of the Clark family, the same people she blamed for allowing her daughter to suffer from relentless bullying. That is why the terror inside the house never truly stopped, and anyone who moves into the property slowly becomes the target of Helen Foster's anger. After realizing the horrifying truth, Chuck quickly searches for Isabel so they can leave the place immediately. However, when he finally finds her, Isabel is standing motionless in front of a doorway with an empty expression on her face. Meanwhile, back at the house, Luke, growing more terrified by the second, finally gathers the courage to ask who the daughter Maria keeps talking about really is. With anger in her voice, Maria immediately answers with the name Mary.
Who is your daughter?
Mary.
When Luke asks where Mary is now, Maria suddenly screams that Mary is dead.
Where is Mary?
Only seconds later, chaos completely erupts inside the house. Helen Foster finally appears in her true, horrifying form. Bonnie and the cameraman instantly panic in terror. Luke quickly runs toward the kitchen to hide, while distant screams from Bonnie and the cameraman echo throughout the house. Luke's fate is never fully revealed, but it strongly suggests that he may become Helen's next victim. At the same time, Isabel suddenly says that she has already seen all of these events before through the sketches she drew years earlier. Helen Foster suddenly appears behind Isabel and places her hand on the girl's shoulder, exactly like the terrifying drawing Isabel once created long before they moved to Ashland Falls. Chuck immediately tries pulling Isabel away and desperately attempts to save her. However, all of his efforts are completely useless. Chuck and Isabel are eventually dragged into a room before the door violently shuts on its own. The film ends by showing the house at 15 Rose Lane once again standing silent and empty. The story never fully explains what truly happened, or what became of Chuck, Isabel, and Maria, leaving the ending surrounded by mystery. And that is where the story ends.